All right, I think we'll get started here. I'm Scott Puckhaber. I'm on the biopharma team here at Barclays. Pleased to be joined today with Aimmune, Eric Bjerkholt, CFO, and Andrew Oxtoby, Chief Commercial Officer. I think today we'll go through some prepared slides with Eric, and then we'll kind of dive into Q&A. So I'll hand it over to Eric now.
Thank you, Scott. So I think I'm going to stand up here for the initial few slides. Thanks to Barclays for inviting us to present at this conference. It's always a great time to be in Miami, and we're thrilled to be here. So first off, I will be making forward-looking statements today, so please refer to our regulatory filings for a long list of risk factors. This slide captures in a summary form what's going on at Aimmune. We're a leader in developing food allergy treatments. We address a very large and growing societal need, which I will show you on the next slide. Aimmune was founded in 2012 as a result of a conference that took place to figure out why, after so many years of knowing that oral immunotherapy works, was there still nobody trying to develop an FDA-approved approach. And out of that conference, where we had participants from academia, from the parent communities, as well as the FDA, came Aimmune, which in a way was one of the first crowdsourced companies, if you want, because FAIR, the Food Allergy Research and Education group, as well as some wealthy individuals with concern about food allergy, founded the company and funded it. Our lead program is AR101. I'll show you the results from our pivotal trials, and we could be the first approved treatment for peanut allergy. We filed the BLA at the end of last year and are planning for U.S. launch towards the end of this year or early next year. And Andrew, who's our recently joined the Chief Commercial Officer, is here with me, and we'll talk you through the commercial strategy. We have a very strong proprietary position, and we're very well funded. In terms of food allergy treatments, there are about 15 million people suffering from food allergies in the United States, and there are 0 approved treatments. And there's a high level of frustration that in 2019, the best an allergist can do is to tell patients with food allergy, please try to avoid the food you're allergic to, and here's a prescription for an EpiPen. It's wholly unsatisfactory, and as a result, every 3 minutes, somebody with a food allergy is sent to the ER, and comes at a huge medical cost that's been estimated to be at least $4 billion a year. And unfortunately, the number of food allergy sufferers is continuing to grow rapidly. Our lead program is in peanut allergy, and our goal for AR101 is for the treatment to be a bridge to confidence, where we can help patients and the families go from a situation where accidental exposures do happen, there's constant risk and worry, and there's even the risk of death, to a situation where there's protection from life-threatening reactions with daily confirmation of protection, and as a result, peace of mind. And the bridge comes through desensitization and immunomodulation, which involves retraining of the immune system. On this slide, we show in a little more detail exactly how the biology works, and how the treatment works. So we are starting by exposing patients to a very low dose of the thing they are allergic to. So we start with 0.5 milligram of AR101, and over a period of 6 months, escalate 600-fold to 300 milligrams, and then continue at that dose, which we call the therapeutic dose. Biologically, what happens is that the peanut-specific IgE, which often causes the reactions, goes up. In fact, it more than doubles over the first 6 months of therapy, and then after about 12 months, it's come back down to the original starting level in most patients. And so we call that the high IgE phase, which in some ways is the period during which you can expect to see the most reactions as a result of treatment. But then after that, the peanut-specific IgE level continues to decrease, and the reactions are expected to be few and far between, while at the same time, the benefit continues to accrue to the patient. So the PALISADE data, PALISADE was our pivotal phase 3 trial. It was a hugely successful trial. Primary endpoint was handily met, where on an ITT basis, 2/3 of the patients could tolerate the primary endpoint of 600 milligrams of peanut protein compared to 4% on placebo. And if you look at the completers, a full 85% could tolerate the 600 milligrams, again, as opposed to 4% on placebo. And we demonstrated a 100-fold increase in the median tolerated dose from 10 milligrams at the entry food challenge to 1,000 milligrams at the exit. In terms of adverse events, we're very consistent with immunotherapy. The rate of anaphylaxis was about 1%, pretty comparable or even lower than what we think is the norm with subcutaneous immunotherapy for environmental allergens, such as hay fever, and birch pollen, and those kinds of things. There was some use of epinephrine, but 98% of that was for mild and moderate events and was highly encouraged. And in terms of GI side effects, we had observed a 0.6% rate of eosinophilic esophagitis, and we think that's reassuringly low. And the rate of GI discontinuation was less than 5%. So key takeaways, about 80% completed the treatment. No anaphylaxis observed after 1 year at the therapeutic dose, very low EOE rates, and a tolerability profile that improves as the immunomodulation continues. This is one of the key slides and kind of summarizes why you would go through oral immunotherapy. Here we compare the exit food challenge between placebo and AR101. Essentially, green is good, yellow and red is bad, and you can see in the placebo group that there's a lot of yellow and red, and the numbers in black are the number of patients that attempt that dose in the food challenge, and as you can see, the numbers decrease very, very rapidly to the point where only 5 patients attempted the 1,000 milligram dose. Contrast that to AR101, where it's mostly green until you get to the 600 and 1,000 milligram levels, and very few patients drop out until you get to those highest levels. And if you look on the right, we observed a full 99% reduction in the use of epinephrine in the exit food challenge at the 100 milligram and 300 milligram levels, which are important levels because the average accidental exposure to peanuts that cause a reaction is 125 milligrams. Most allergists doing allergy shots would have the resources and capacity to implement AR101. We think AR101 is very similar to allergy shots in that way. Allergy shots represents probably at least 50% of the revenues in most allergy practices. They're set up to do it even at pretty high volume per day. They have the infrastructure, they know how to do it, they have the support staff and the exam rooms or observation rooms. And so we think AR101 will fit in quite seamlessly into a lot of allergy practices, and Andrew will talk more about that. 2019 is a very catalyst-rich year. We like to say that Aimmune is a 2019 story. We look forward to BLA acceptance at the end of this month. We'll have the top-line phase 3 data from the European Artemis trial with AR101 also towards the end of this month. and then later in the year, the MAA submission around the middle of the year, initiation of our second program for egg allergy around the middle of the year, and then potentially FDA advisory committee in the second half, et cetera. We're very well funded with access to about $470 million in cash as of the beginning of the year. So I'll leave this slide up, and we can go to questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Eric. So I guess just, jumping right in. So you guys are in a unique position to have breakthrough therapy designation and fast track designation going down a non-PDUFA pathway. So can you kind of describe the conversations you've had thus far with regulators, and, kind of moving forward to the approval?
Yes, thank you. So we get that question a lot, and just to catch everybody up, so we believe the FDA regulations pretty clearly say that allergenic extracts are exempt from PDUFA, but the FDA have made it clear to us that in their mind, all allergenic products are exempt from PDUFA. And so that led to a little bit of confusion, but typically on a non-PDUFA pathway, the expected review timeline is about 12 months from filing. And so at the end of March, we expect to hear from the FDA whether our file has been accepted for review, and at that time, we also expect that they will clarify what the target review timeline is. And our base assumption is that that'll be most likely 12 months from when they started review the file, which was at the end of January, but we'll have to wait and see.
Gotcha. And then for Andrew, assuming that you get earlier approval than any competitor, how do you, position the approval with, physicians and capitalize and optimize the launch?
Yeah. So we are currently building out our commercial organization in the U.S. and actually also in Europe with an anticipated launch in Europe of 2020. But for the U.S., there are about 5,000 allergists currently practicing. Now, if you compare that to some of the other specialties, so you've got about 100,000 pediatricians, about 350,000 primary care physicians. So it is a relatively concentrated group of physicians. And so we have the opportunity with, we think, a footprint of about 80 to 120 field representatives to be able to very adequately cover them. They tend to work in clusters of practice, so it's probably targets of around 2,000 to 2,500 people that we want to try and reach. And one of the things that we're talking about internally is to make sure that we give a frictionless experience for both the patient and for the physician. And so helping physician and allergy practices understand what they need to have in place to make sure that the patient's able to come in and get a great experience, go through that 6-month dose escalation period, and then go on to the therapeutic dose. As Eric had mentioned, there is a strong analog with allergy shots. So one of the things I did prior to coming to the company, I've been here about 8 weeks, and so I've been with Lilly for 16 years before coming in, and so I had to do some homework to understand exactly what I was signing up for. Part of that was to understand what does it look like today in an allergy practice, and if you're getting allergy shots, then certainly for the first 6-month period, you're probably coming in as a patient once a week, and then you sit there for an observation period of maybe 30 to 40 minutes. It's similar from a AR101 perspective in that you would come in every 2 weeks, and after getting a dose in the physician's office, you would be there for about 45 minutes for an observation period. And so there's some strong analogs in terms of how this would be administered. As a patient, after you go in and have that initial dose, you would then go home, and for the next 2 weeks, you would take the dose at that level every single day, and then you would come in after that 2-week period to get the next dose. We want to provide some ability for physicians to be able to customize that and to be able to adjust the dose up or down depending on how the patient's going. So we say the 6-month dose escalation period is sort of the speed limit. So you don't want to go any faster than that. You may go a little bit slower depending on how the patient responds. And there may be situations where the patient has a cold or something for 4 days where they can't take the dose that they're on. And that's a situation where the physician may say, you know what, for the next 2 weeks, we want to keep you at the same dosage level. So we're working at looking at distribution models where we can build in that flexibility so that it's simple for the physician and simple for the patient in terms of how they receive the product that they have to take at home. And then once they've gone through that dose escalation period, they'll then be there on a therapeutic dose of 300 milligrams. So we have opportunity between now and the end of this year to understand how we can help physicians make sure their clinics are set up properly to be able to administer the product. So we look forward to having a chance to talk to them once we're approved and launch at the end of the year.
Great. And then, as you look at your conversations with payers thus far, how have they received your, kind of proposed pricing strategy?
Yeah.
And then, what will the impact of those discussions be at year end or first quarter of 2020, depending on when the approval comes?
Yeah. So we've had some discussions with payers already, and the first thing, which is very encouraging, is they recommend the unmet need. So they recommend there's no approved treatment for these patients out there today, and they recommend the impact that this can have on patients and their families. And so we aim to have conversations with payers that would cover somewhere on the order of about 80% of the covered lives by the time we get to the end of this year. That would not necessarily mean we will have contracted with them, but we will at least have had conversations with them. What is emerging in those discussions is, besides the very obvious benefit to patients and parents from the psychological benefit of being protected from accidental exposure, there's also data which says that if you are a patient allergy sufferer or a peanut allergy sufferer today, there is a 1 in 4 chance that you will be in the emergency room in any given year. So there's real costs associated with going to the emergency room in the U.S., clearly, well, everywhere, but particularly in the U.S. And so we're working on what does that look like in terms of a value story to help payers get comfortable with that. So in terms of specific pricing guidance, we won't be giving any specific pricing specifics until we get around launch, which I think is pretty consistent with other launch products. But so far, the discussions with payers have been very positive.
Great. And then when you look at, what the sales team will need kind of going forward, as they, launch the product and everything, how much education will physicians need, shifting from just epinephrine avoidance into kind of this new treatment paradigm? And then, maybe, an additional follow-up to that of just, how you guys place in the market compared to competitors and, the advantages of, the oral therapy?
Yeah. So we, today, and I mentioned this 5,000 allergists out there today, there are roughly 100 centers, maybe a few more, which prescribe what is called a homebrew version of OIT, so using grocery store-bought products. And that's problematic for a number of reasons. And we know that from research that we've done and from conversations that we've had, that upon the availability of an FDA-approved option, around 75% of allergists have indicated that they would be interested and willing to prescribe that. And so there is a large number of physicians that really are waiting for this product to help their patients. And so to your question around what does that mean and how are we going to help them, some practices, those that are practicing the homebrew OIT, are set up today. And so essentially once that we have approval, they'll be able to move from the practice that they've been doing with homebrew to the approved product. There are other practices that are going to have to look at what their setup looks like. So either maybe they need to look at staff training, maybe they need to look at their space and their scheduling. It isn't just something where on day one I can just go from not prescribing this to prescribing it if I have no appreciation for what's required from a logistics perspective. So there's probably some peer-to-peer facilitation to be done between people that are doing homebrew OIT today and those that want to learn how to use AR101 once it's approved. And so we want to try and help provide that. In terms of competitors, I think it's probably known to those of you that follow this space, there's been a likely delay in the approval of any potential competitor. So we realize we have the ability to be out there talking to physicians about our products upon approval at the end of the year. I'm not going to talk about the competitive product, but certainly we're excited that we're going to have the chance to go out there with our commercial team and talk to physicians.
Great. And when you think about, the 101 asset and what you've learned, developing discussions, everything else, how can you leverage, everything that you've learned into the 201 asset for the egg allergy, and then additional indications, kind of moving forward that you guys are looking at?
So biologically, the concept is going to be very similar. So AR201 is our phase 2 program for egg allergy. We filed an IND at the end of last year. We've been cleared by the FDA to proceed with the trial. So we expect to enroll the first patient around the middle of the year. What's different, however, is that for peanut allergy and for tree nut allergies, only about 20% of the patients eventually outgrow their allergy, whereas for egg and also for milk, it's the reverse, where the vast majority of patients tend to outgrow it. But also, nutritionally, egg and milk are more important to most people than peanuts and tree nuts, and so there's a high level of interest in a therapy that could kind of speed up, if you wish, the ability to kind of tolerate those foods. And also for the 20% or more that don't outgrow it, there's a very high interest in having a therapy that avoids accidental exposures and reactions to those.
Got it. And then, as far as, how physicians are going to view, the oral therapy and the side effect profile, what is kind of the, over time, the optimal patient or, maybe the subset that, you guys are looking at for, hey, it's going to be this age and this severity of, allergy, for use, with physicians and how they're going to view kind of the side effect profile going forward?
Well, certainly I think that, for any physician that's familiar with oral immunotherapy, the side effect profile is not surprising at all. I think it's very predictable. And I think also they recognize that as patients go through this treatment regime, particularly in the dose escalation period, which is where you see the majority of the side effect profile, they're first of all getting a dose in the doctor's office under the supervision of the allergist. They then go home and every evening are taking a dose under the supervision of a very vigilant parent or caregiver. And so to the extent that one would expect any side effects to occur within 45 minutes of that dose, there's somebody there ready to manage that should it occur. So I think that from that perspective, it's predictable and expected.
Great. Well, I think our time's running up now, so I just want to thank you both for being here, and we'll be across the way for additional questions in the breakout session.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.